I think Arc Raiders is going to add PvE content in the future. Now, before you reply to the video and say, oh, don't try to change the game, don't try to beg for PvE, that's not what this is about. Since the game first debuted, this has been one of the big debates, and people don't want it, they don't think it belongs, and we know the history of the game was originally going to be a PvE game. So if they're going to add it, or will they add it, many think it's going to be bad if they decide to. Well, a recent interview, I think, adds to my own theory that they will eventually add some type of PvE content. They might already even have plans for it. They also had interesting remarks about the goal and the fantasy of Arc Raiders being more PvE than PvP. Now, previously, I outlined my own theory why I thought they would add PvE down the road, not just because Tarkov did it, but because their posture towards PvE players and sort of the less hardcore players, I think signals a willingness to do it, not just because they think the game's going to appeal to casuals. They clearly are having success, which means the appeal of the game might be quite a bit more broad than just the people who like extraction shooters, but I do think there are people who are going to play this game in a less hardcore way, not necessarily that like casuals are going to flock to Arc Raiders. And how they're treating player wipes, I think, is a pretty strong signal. They are cognizant to the fact that they're going to have to give less hardcore players an inroad to enjoy the game. Well, if you look at what they said in this recent interview at TwitchCon, I think it's very, very telling, and it honestly adds more to my observations up to this point. Now, if you like this video or opinion pieces like this, be sure to hit like, share, and subscribe, and check out my live streams as well. Now, in case you missed it, the developers sat down for a great interview at TwitchCon, and they had some pretty interesting things to say. Now, we don't need to retread how the game was originally built for PvE and why they added PvP, but this interview did give a lot of context and philosophy behind why both elements need to be present in the game. Without PvE, they were worried it would just turn into sort of an extraction deathmatch, and without PvP, well, it wasn't exciting enough, it wasn't fun, it was just sort of boring. Now, some of the statements from the interview I think are really worth paying attention to, and the first one is this. They said that, quote, "The main threat is Arc, and we want to keep it that way." Now, this is a pretty strong indicator that PvP will never be the main threat or focus, and if they think the main threat is Arc, and they intend to keep it that way, I would assume that future plans and content updates will revolve around that, or at the very least include updates to Arc and PvE threats. Now, if you were in doubt that this was something that they were going to focus on, they actually even talked about other games. They said that, quote, "Other extraction shooters may dial back the PvE." So if you were hoping that they were going to dial back the PvE in favor of a more PvP-focused game, that is something they are not planning to do. More than that, they will not force PvP engagements. When asked about questing and forcing PvP, they said that, quote, "You will never be forced into PvP in our questing." Now, that's a pretty big promise, and you'll notice that a consistent theme is cropping up here. They're using very strong language about this. The main threat is Arc, and we want to keep it that way, and you will never be forced to PvP for a quest. It's almost as if internally, they have fenced the game off with respect to PvE being a mainstay and somewhat protected element of the game. And they actually provide, I think, a very solid reason for that. So the fantasy of the game just would not line up with the goal being PvP, and they were very clear that they want the game to appeal to their original PvE fans. They basically said it wouldn't make much sense for the fantasy and the lore of the game to have folks going up to the top side with the goal of just killing each other. But there is something here that I think thickens the plot, and this might sound familiar to Destiny fans, but at some level, I can't see an ongoing game not having this sort of an outlook. They said that, quote, "Internally, we have referred to this as a 10-year game." Now, I don't know about you, but if you want a game like this to last for 10 years, you're going to need to do more than just new maps, locations, or player wipes. You are going to need content. And content is the key. Helldivers 2 has shown this. You can cause really big resurgences in your player base with new content, with enemies, with new things to do. The PvP element at some level is not as evolvable because PvP always devolves into metas. PvE, however, well, the sky is the limit. New arc units, new threats, new activities. You really don't have any limitation. You could expand the lore, the fantasy, the story of the game. Something new could be discovered. A brand new threat could show up. And that's, I think, when the way they answered another question about sort of the game ongoing, it really stood out to me. When speaking about the game ongoing, they talked about the launch version of the game as the game mode, and that's what they have today, this game mode. Now, this implies evolutions or maybe even more modes could come down the road. Now, obviously, too many modes can dilute your player base, it can hurt your player funnel, but I could see a handful of things showing up. Number one, I think you could see bespoke PvE content, something that's almost raid-like, where you go in and you gotta work with a bunch of people. You could have missions where you have to go and investigate something, and you gotta work together instead of going up and potentially fighting or getting shot or betrayed. You could even have story content. They seem to be focused on having lore and a fantasy that continues to expand and evolve as you unlock things and do things. I also have talked about how they could add a PvE intro mode to the game, sort of because the opening can be a bit tough. It's very player dependent. If other people just decide to kill like crazy in those opening sessions, then you're not going to have a great time, and you're sort of drinking from the fire hose. There is so much to learn and figure out. They're going to have to monitor those early quit rates to see, hey, could we add something that maybe is a little bit more protected for those introductory experiences? And the bespoke and the aspirational PvE content would be something that you would work towards as a player. You want to be good at extracting in the PvEVP environment because that's going to get you access to the primo or the new content. A little bit of gatekeeping can be helpful, but I think the reason this would be appealing is for one big reason. There is a very clear categorical difference between extracting in an environment when, PvE and PvP are coexisting, and that's not quite the same as doing something that is almost entirely PvE in its nature. Big threats like the Queens require cooperative play. It's not a traditional extraction type of content. It's far more adjacent to something like Helldivers or Destiny, or even a world boss in an MMO. Having that end with a PvP betrayal or a third party comes in and just kills you, I think that would be pretty demoralizing and could hurt engagement if you have aspirational content like that. And so much about this game is built to appeal to PvE players. If you look at the grind and the quests and the skill and the leveling up, it really speaks to those type of game players. And they clearly don't want PvP to be the central theme of the game or even forced on you in quests. They made that pretty clear in this interview. When you really look at their comments, in addition to how they're treating player wipes, I really get the feeling that PvE content is in this game's future, which I think could only help it grow and have longevity. But those are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can leave a comment below. Be sure to hit like, share, and subscribe so that way I can see you in the next video.